There's something about hotel rooms, impersonal, temporary, quiet, that can bring us closer to our inner lives. Removed from the familiarity of home, we start to notice the subtle undercurrents of who we are and how we relate to others. Photographer Danielle Goldstein's project, Transcience, explores that intimate space with honesty, restraint, and emotional depth. Made over several years during her travels, the photographs in Transcience take place almost entirely within the walls of hotel rooms, but rather than feeling confined, the work feels expansive. In these transient spaces, Danielle explores themes of identity, intimacy, family, and the complexities of romantic relationships. Her images are tender without being sentimental, constructed without losing spontaneity. They hold the stillness of contemplation and the emotional weight that often emerges in solitude. Transience is as much about absence as it is about presence, about the gestures, glances, and quiet tensions that linger when we're suspended between here and there, between connection and distance. It's a body of work that reveals how photography can serve as a mirror, not just of others, but of ourselves. The work also serves as a point of collaboration between Danielle and her daughter, Caroline. Caroline is a fiction writer, and she uses the photographs as inspiration that provides a wonderful complement to the images in the book. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Well, Danielle, Caroline, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm excited. I don't think I've had a mother-daughter pairing before, so this should be quite fun.
Yeah, that's the mother-daughter collaboration is something that I think, makes this project particularly unique. And it's also been incredibly rewarding and truly a gift for me as Caroline's mother to be able to work with her on the tail end of this project.
Yeah, because this project started off not as a collaboration. It was more of an exploration on your end, Danielle. So why don't you talk to us about that first, about how this project, started in the...
Yeah. So the project started, as the days and weeks and months and years go on, I keep having to extend the length of the project, because when I first started printing, and it was like 13 years, and then it was 14 years, and now I think we're moving on to 15 years when I started the project. I was relatively new to photography. I started photography about 16 years ago, when actually Caroline was a senior in high school. And I remember that day well. I knew my older daughter was in college. I wanted to have something that was purely my own. I'd always liked taking pictures, but I really didn't know much about the mechanics of photography, really anything other than clicking the shutter. So I started a photography class at ICP, Digital One. I knew really nothing. And as soon as I started photographing, I knew that I had found my passion, and I found what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I'd only been photographing about a year. And when I first started, I was so enamored with everything about photography. And I dabbled in all different genres, street photography, but I also played around with light painting and long exposures. And I just really wanted to learn everything that I possibly could about photography, about the technical aspects, and the artistic aspects too, which that was a bigger lift for me. My background is as a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. I never considered myself to be a creative person. So 15 years ago, we had traveled very often as a family, Caroline and her sister and my ex-husband. And we were in an ancient hotel room in southern Spain. And for some reason, the room spoke to me, and I started thinking about. I should also mention I was a history major in college, and European history, and history really informs both my work and how it is now, and how I think it might look in the future. And there was just something about the room that spoke to me. It weirdly felt haunted. And I thought about all the souls that had inhabited this transient space, because hotel rooms are sort of odd. I mean, they become your home for the length of time that you stay there, and yet hundreds and thousands of other people are in this room. And I started thinking about the people that inhabited the room and what they brought to the room and what they left behind and what they took with them, both literally and metaphorically. So there was a ledge in this room because I did not have a tripod. But I had, and I thought, like, I'm going to play around with a ghosted image, a very, sort of literal depiction of what I thought this room might have looked like with, ghosted souls in it. And I took that first picture, and I thought, this is cool. This is interesting. I think I'm going to keep doing this. And I didn't at the time really know exactly why, other than, as I explained, I thought it was sort of this dispassionate exploration of these transient spaces. And I started photographing myself in every hotel room. I have photographed myself in every hotel room I have ever stayed in for now, moving on to 16 years, no matter where I was, no matter how I felt. And Caroline knows in some of these rooms, altitude sickness doesn't matter. You gotta take the image. You gotta do it. So that's how the project started. And it wasn't until I could talk for like an hour about,
what really sort of piqued my interest, because I was, I saw, when I originally received the materials for it, I often photograph the hotel rooms I stay in as well, and I encourage people who take my workshops to do it, especially as they occupy the space, as they're living in it, because it's part of the experience of traveling that people often don't photograph. And I go, that's as much about the story as it is. So that initially what piqued my curiosity about this project. But then when I saw that you were also a street photographer, the idea that, that even though you sort of cut your teeth on photography working on the street, you did something that was very sort of personal. And yes. I think a lot of street photographers, they just sort of see themselves as just that. And they don't choose to explore something else. And I love the idea that you didn't start this project because of some, you're exploring great themes or ideas and we're thinking about it as a project. It was just like, oh, I wonder what would happen if I did this. And that it turns into something. And so many of the people that I photographed on this show oftentimes have started projects just from that idea. Yeah. What would happen if I did this? And then it takes on a life of its own.
I think that's absolutely right. And I have found that every project I've ever done, I've backed into. I've photographed because something about it, something about the scene or the place or the street has touched me, and I just keep photographing. And then you have to do what most of us photographers don't like to do, which is go back and look at all your work and curate it and start to think about, right? Like we hate to do it. I mean, I want to go out and shoot. I want to shoot. But it's often, I believe, and at least for me, I'm an intuitive photographer. I photograph what my intuition tells me is, something that is appealing to me, but I don't always know why. And I can't always put my finger on it, but often, again, and it could be, weeks, months, years, until you go back and you start thinking about it and you start putting things together and realizing that you have different themes and that you might actually have a body of work that says something more than just, oh, I like this picture.
Initially, the images that you made just included you, but slowly you incorporated your ex-husband and your daughters in these photographs. Tell me about why you wanted to incorporate that aspect into the work.
Yeah. Originally, again, I had, because I think I'm a lawyer and I'm a linear thinker, I set strict rules for myself because, with this sort of project, and I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to be the placeholder. I don't want these self-portraits to be sort of this navel-gazing, exploration of me, because who wants to look at that? I wanted to use myself as a placeholder, so I would never show my face. I wanted to sort of be an every woman kind of thing so that my viewer or whoever the viewer was could insert themselves into the room and not feel like they were inserting themselves into my personal life. And I did that for years. I mean, I photographed that way for years. And then as it evolved and as I learned more about photography and as I tried to push myself as a photographer, I started to worry that the images were one note, that they were all going to kind of look the same, even though the rooms, of course, were different. But, and again, for me as a photographer, it's a hard thing for me to do, is to sort of mess it up a little bit and make, not have like this one solitary image in this room, and try to expand it a little bit. So I asked my ex-husband if he would mind being in the pictures, and he said he wouldn't. And so I started photographing him and me. And then when we traveled with our daughters, I sometimes would photograph them as well. And I did photograph friends, anyone who I would travel with, although the book is strictly family. I felt that was important. So that's why I started sort of expanding it. But even all the years when I was photographing myself with my ex-husband and our daughters, I still didn't think about it. I did not think about the work in any kind of personal way. I asked him to be in the pictures because I thought they would be more interesting that way. But I didn't ask him to be in the pictures because I was thinking about creating a diary. And that didn't happen until many years later.
As one of the subjects in the photographs, Caroline, what was it like for you to, collaborate with your mother initially as a subject matter, especially at that age where, as a young girl, you're probably very self-conscious in terms of how you look in front of the camera?
Yeah, well, I trust my mom innately. And it honestly never, when she was photographing me, I don't know if my sister can say the same, but it never occurred to me that, I don't know, she would like portray me in a way that I didn't feel good about, because I also knew that this was art. Like it wasn't like a vanity project. It wasn't about how beautiful or not anyone looked. It was purely her art. It was purely her project. And I've always kind of only believed in her and only wanted to support her. And quite frankly, all I had to do was sit on the bed and read a book or look at my phone. I mean, my mom and I were just in London last week, and we had just got to the hotel room. It was late at night. I was exhausted. I just wanted to go to sleep. And my mom set up the tripod and she was like, I'm just going to get one shot. You know what the deal is. You know what you have to do. And I just laid there, looked at my phone. She got the shot, and that was that. And it'll turn out to be probably a beautiful image. So being the subject, it never felt anything other than, okay, let's do this. I'm in. That's
great. One of the interesting things, and you kind of touched on this earlier, Danielle, is like, when you start revisiting the pictures and you start culling and sort of editing, you get to rediscover the images and you get to find things that you really didn't realize may have been happening or they get revealed to you as a result of revisiting them, right? So you have to do that as part of the process of culling and selecting images for this book. But because, Caroline, you're writing in this as well, you're both having to explore these images from very different perspectives. Tell me about what you kind of discovered in the work as the process started gelling, and you, in your case, Caroline, were actually writing fiction inspired by the photographs.
Mm-hmm. Is that for me or for you?
Either one of you.
Either one.
Well, okay, I guess we can start in a linear way because I didn't realize what this project was until about 5 years ago. I was going to Photo NOLA, which was my first portfolio review, and I thought I might bring this project along with my street work. So I started printing, and because of the nature of the project, it is pretty chronological. I mean, the images sort of have to be seen chronologically. And I remember so clearly, I'm printing and I'm printing and I'm printing, and then I got them all together and I put them together, this 13 by 19 prints in a chronological way. And I was sitting on the floor in my office and putting them, in the clamshell one after another. And I literally, it was like I stopped dead in my tracks. I mean, I had never really experienced anything like this, but I just completely burst into tears and realized, like, oh my God, like I have been doing this project for 10 years. And I never realized that this is an actual diary of my life. And when I looked at the images of me with my ex-husband, I could clearly see the disconnect, and I could clearly see the lack of communication, whatever it was. And I could see in the images things that I could not see in real life. And I don't know if, the camera allowed me to see things that I wasn't prepared to see in my actual life, or if the camera just doesn't lie. I'm not really sure. To this day, I'm still not 100% sure, but it was the first time when I realized that the project was not what I had intended it to be, that it had evolved into something else entirely, and that I had something here that I never expected. And especially as sort of a street photographer, somebody who photographs strangers, as someone who photographs, I don't do that many portraits. It's my approach in the street is also much more hands off than a lot of other street photographers. And yet here I was sitting with a project that was intensely personal, and this sort of dichotomy was just sort of kind of mind blowing to me. It still is. I still try to jibe the two, that, how could I made this incredibly personal and revealing project. And then I photograph in another way when I'm photographing people who are not me. Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And actually, in a lot of ways, it does make sense. It makes sense for who I am as a person, for my personality, for what I feel comfortable with. And I think that ultimately is the key to sort of success as a photographer, as an artist. I think you have to be true to yourself. And I was true to myself in this project. I'm also true to myself when I'm photographing, in the street or people who are not me.
Yeah. And how about for you, Caroline, in terms of the work you produced?
Well, I mean, listening to my mom talk about this now, I also do think that looking at my mom's work, both through sort of a critical lens and then also through a personal lens, like looking at the final product, it actually did kind of cast light on my parents' relationship in a way that I wasn't always able to see when I was actually living through it. Like, when you're living through a family situation, you're just kind of taking it day by day, and you're obviously incredibly subjective and you can't have any distance from it. So looking at this project from a distance of time, and then also like the separation between real life and art, I was looking at some of these images and, talking to my mom about it too. But I was seeing this kind of distance between my parents, or this kind of disconnect, or this sense of loneliness. I mean, certainly from my mom's side, because it's her work, but also from my dad's side. And, that the distance between them, it became really apparent because it was on the page, a real concrete material object that I could look at and see, like this was very real. This was happening. And I knew that kind of intellectually, but this was something that actually helped me understand from a more emotional perspective, like what the reality really was. So, this project is obviously it's so personal. And I don't know, it helped me kind of understand my parents' divorce in a new way.
Yeah, I think those images that include your ex-husband in there, sandwiched between these sequence of images where it starts off with just a singular figure, and towards the tail end of the book, it's more singular as well. Though you incorporate some other images with, your children. I think your grandchild in the shot. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the things that really struck me was like the disconnect, the emotional distance that came across in those images. And to my thinking, I don't think you could have intentionally gone in there to make those kind of photographs, recognizing what they were going to be. I think that the inherent power of those images is that it was completely subconscious, but it pervades each photograph, because it struck me that the sensibility of the frame that you developed as a street photographer was still informing those photographs, even though they were very, very personal. But there was still a sense of not so much a snapshot aesthetic that's happening with those photographs, because they're pretty sort of well controlled, but they don't seem heavy-handed at all. They seem very genuine, and I think that's what allows the poignancy of the emotional distance that's represented in those photographs to really come across and have an impact.
Yeah, I think that's right. My approach has always been, once I knew I was going to do this project, I do, as Caroline said, I set up the tripod almost as soon as I get to the room I'm going to be in, and it stays there for however long I'm there. And I realized that sometimes the images are fast, sometimes I don't have time, or sometimes I see what I want to do right away. And I snap it and that's it. But often it does marinate. And again, in like sort of a subconscious way. And we could be in a room and just like reading or on our phones or getting dressed or taking a shower and something. And sometimes it's just intangible. Something moves me to press the shutter at the moment that I do. And I really do believe that it was in a lot of these images, it's my subconscious at work. I do. And I think that's probably true for most artists, right? I mean, you can't, if you're always conscious of what you want to do, your head's probably going to explode because there's too many ideas and too many things. For the pieces that you wrote for the book, Caroline, can you talk to me about, the process of writing them? Because they're not autobiographical, but they take riffs from what exists in the photographs and hence what you experienced, in your personal life. Talk to me about that, and just tell me a little more about your career as a writer.
So my career as a writer, I'm a fiction writer. My first novel came out in August 2024. I have another book coming out in March 2026. I have an MFA in fiction. I'd never written anything for art in any kind of official capacity. So I think my mom and I agreed. We'd had a lot of conversations before I sat down to write about what kind of writing we wanted this to be. And we both agreed that we didn't want it to be critical. Like we didn't want it to be a traditional essay, kind of a traditional commentary. I think we wanted, I am the writer because I'm her daughter, but I think I'm also the writer because I'm a fiction writer. And we thought that could be kind of a really interesting perspective to have on art versus an art writer or another photographer kind of writing these pieces. So the approach that I took was through the lens of a fiction writer, but then also being literally one of the subjects of this body of work. So it was kind of this interesting meld of memoir-ish plus fiction, which kind of creates this, I think this sort of new vibe of what is real and what isn't. And a lot of it is real. Like the emotional thrust of everything is real. Some of the kind of little snippets that I wrote they actually happened. And then I would add details that are fictionalized just to kind of make it like a fuller world. But for the most part, I mean, what I felt was true and what I experienced was true, but with kind of a gloss of fiction to kind of make it feel like you're reading something novelistic.
Yeah, I found your attention to detail was very photographic. You know, it was like you were making pictures with words.
Thank you.
Those are the little details that you would include in terms of the room, and include, especially with the one that you did with from a maid's perspective. I thought that was just a nice compliment to what the work that your mom was doing.
Well, I definitely feel like I am a visual person. Like I'm a visual writer. So when I'm writing a scene, I just see it in my head and then I write what I see. So I think also that just kind of happens to be my process. It happens to be how my creative brain works. So it was really fun to kind of like do the opposite, where I'm looking at an image and then I'm pulling out what to write about it. So that was like a really interesting kind of fun challenge for me too.
If you're ready to take your photography for a deeper, more personal level while exploring one of the most visually rich places in the world, I invite you to join me for my upcoming spring workshop in Japan. I'll be leading a small group through Nobechi's Creative's immersive program, designed to challenge and inspire photographers who want to make more than just postcard images. You can learn more and reserve a spot by visiting nobechicreative.com. I'm also partnering with F8 Photographic Workshops for a special workshop in Vietnam at the end of the year. These workshops are designed to go beyond technique and to help you refine your vision, express your voice, and make meaningful, connected images. For full information, visit f8photographicworkshops.com or check out the show notes. What was the experience like with you working together as artists?
Amazing.
Not just being mother and daughter, right?
I mean, it's indescribable. I mean, first and foremost, always, I'm a mother, and I'm Caroline's mother and Alex's mother too. And I'm equally proud of both my daughters. But, you know, I raised her and I knew she was a writer from the time she was, you know, could write. And I watched her and encouraged her blossom as an artist, and then to ultimately collaborate on my book, which like I never thought I would have a book, and then to collaborate with my daughter on it's really an indescribable joy. Caroline and I have always supported each other as artists. I know I've told this story before, but when I was in about 15 years ago, I'd been doing photography for about a year, and Caroline had already started writing. I mean, she was probably a freshman in college, and she was sitting on the couch behind me, and I didn't want to nag her, but, you know, she's like 18. And I'm like, you know, you really need a website. You got to have a website. Yeah. Cara, come on, you got to have a website. And she's like, later, mañana. So I sat down with her, and we sat down on the couch next to each other, and we each built a website together, side by side. And I think that that's sort of a metaphor for how it's been since then, that we bounce ideas off each other. We support each other. I mean, of course, I adore her more than anything. But to have this commonality as an artist, it's an incredible gift. It really is. And, you know, when I realized this, when I knew this project was going to be a book, when I had a publisher who was interested in publishing it, Martin Schultz, who has been wonderful. And when I told him that my daughter was a writer, he got very excited because he had the idea that, you know, would she want to write the text for this book? And I was very cautious because of the nature of the project. I did not want her to feel like she was in the middle, or that you know, I didn't want to put her in any kind of uncomfortable position or situation. So when I approached her and brought up the idea of whether, she was interested in writing the text for the book, it was 100% her decision. And luckily, we always were on the same page that we didn't want this to be, sort of a personal diary, that we wanted to be more fictionalized. But I was so touched that even before we got into the discussion of what the text should be, she fully supported me and was fully, and wanted to do it for me and with me. And I'm going to get teary now, but as a parent, that's the ultimate. You can't ask for anything more than that.
And about for you, Caroline?
I think like the word that's sort of coming up for me when I think about collaborating with my mom is trust, because that's the nature of our relationship, is that we're very honest with each other. We're really our most authentic selves with each other, and we respect each other. We support each other. We're getting less and less afraid to say hard things to each other. So I think that the nature of that relationship just translated really beautifully and really easily to an artistic collaboration. Because I think whenever you're collaborating with someone on an artistic project that you care deeply about, it can be really vulnerable. It can be really difficult if your visions don't align, if you just don't inherently trust each other's the taste and the vision and the skill set. Like, that can be a recipe for disaster, and that can really break apart relationships. And I think because we didn't have to deal with any of that, like we already had that foundation that we had been building for 30 plus years, like that was already in place. So as a writer, I felt really confident taking risks. I was writing in a way that I don't write usually in my, professional life, in my fiction life, in my day job as an editor. I was writing really differently. I really was taking risks. I was kind of letting myself go, sort of throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck. And I never felt scared to try, because I knew that my mom wanted me to do that, and that if she didn't like something, she would tell me. But for the most part, like, I also know that she likes my taste and that she likes my writing. And having that kind of support also just felt really liberating. So it was just a really beautiful and truly the easiest time I've ever had writing. Like, the easiest. And writing is incredibly difficult. It's so hard. This was fun and just joyful. And it just felt we were aligned the entire time.
Yeah, the first paragraph is always the most painful thing for me.
Oh, it's so hard. It doesn't really get easier. No. You get used to how hard it is. Yeah. And that's what makes it easier, but it's always hard.
You make it look easy, though. You do. I know how hard it is. And, that's when I have to write, I'm like, oh, my God. But I have Caroline and her sister both, the two best editors on earth to edit whatever I write. And that's been, that's great, too. So, yeah.
What's really interesting about this project is that you are like in these idealized spaces that you often see in brochures and websites about these rooms, and how the view and the bedding and the chairs and the decorations. And yet the dynamic that existed within you and your relationship with your husband and then as a family really sort of come across. And I thought it provides a really interesting contrast as opposed to having made those images in your own home, right? Very different feel. I think that just thematically, it provides a great contrast.
It's also, you go, well, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the nature of the hotel rooms has changed as the project, has moved on. And as I've started traveling alone or, on photography trips and staying in in India, some pretty rough places. But to your point, you can stay in the most beautiful hotel room in the world and have all the accoutrements that go along with it. And, guess what? Your life comes with you, no matter where you are. No matter where you are, no matter what you do, you can't run away from it. And you can try to take, you can take a break and listen, traveling is amazing. And, absolutely a huge part of my life, but you can't run away from what your life looks like. And that's the truth.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about sort of the themes and ideas that come across in this project. And it's always really interesting that I talk to very few people who go in thinking, oh, these are the themes and the ideas that I'm exploring. They just kind of dive in and they start making the work, and then they slowly discover what those are. But I'm curious from both of your perspectives in terms of you as a photographer sort of discovering the themes as the project's going on, and also you, Caroline, as a writer, how do you discover what the work is about as you're making it, as you're progressing with it? So, Caroline, why don't we just start with you?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think I had a similar experience in writing the text for this book, because I obviously, I went into it knowing more than the basic kind of circumstances around which this work was created and what it was representing. But when I was writing, as is always the case, I made sense of it as I was working. So, I mean, my process with just kind of figuring out what to write is that I just sat down with a PDF and I looked at each image and I kind of played like a word association game with myself. I just pulled out like, what are the major kind of visual elements of each photograph that I could kind of spin into something bigger, or what are other works of art that this reminds me of, or what's like an essay that I read in 2010 that I've always wanted to do something with that I can put in here. And then throughout that process, I kind of culled that down to 4. And as I was writing into these images, I was kind of figuring out what I was writing about and what this work was about. So, I mean, sometimes it's not until literally the very end that you understand what you're doing and what this work is. And sometimes it's not until after it's published and then people have things to say about it. And you're like, oh, I did not even realize I was doing that at the time. And that's, the unending magic and mystery of the creative process. You can have an idea about something and it is something entirely different, and it's charismatic and dynamic in that way.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And it's really the same as a photographer. There are a few images where I didn't see things in the frame until we were getting ready to publish a book. I was like, oh my God, like sometimes like, my ex-husband was like hiding behind a curtain or something. Like, I was like, what's he doing there? I didn't know he was in there. As Caroline was talking about her process, it occurred to me, and again, how lucky I am as a photographer to have had the opportunity to work with my daughter and to have her look at the images and write about them. And she can draw things out that maybe I wouldn't see, or maybe you wouldn't see, or maybe somebody else wouldn't see. And what I've been finding in the few months since the book's been published is that even now, after the book's been published, I'm thinking about different ideas and themes that are integral to the work that I wasn't even conscious of at the time, or even conscious of when, we published it. And I guess, that's a good thing, because what you want to do as an artist is, be true to yourself, but touch other people, and also start a conversation and have ideas that are not stagnant and that can grow and can lead to other ideas. So that's sort of been a surprising aspect of it.
And how did this turn into a book? Was it as a result of a portfolio review?
It was. Photonola, actually, Caroline went with me. It was right before COVID. And I wound up getting sick. So I really didn't show the portfolio much. And then COVID happened, and, we had years of not doing anything. And then I guess now it's been 3 years ago, I went to PhotoFest in Houston. I decided I wanted to really try this portfolio review thing. And I brought this project, and I also brought street work. And my very first reviewer was Martin Schilt. and his wife. And his wife happens to be a psychotherapist. And within 5 minutes of looking at the work, they wanted to publish it. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, really, I couldn't, because again, with my background as, I was a lawyer and I was a full-time mom, and I never thought of myself as an artist. And, I dabbled in photography. I loved it. I was committed to it. And I mean, obviously still am, but I never, it was always felt like a fluke when somebody would buy a print, or if a print, something was published, or, lots of imposter syndrome. So when somebody wanted to actually publish this book, it was just, sort of an incrediable thing.
Who was the first person you called?
Sure, Caroline.
Probably me.
Caroline and we the three of us have a group chat that's like, 24/7. And I'm sure I texted both of them, and then, I called Caroline first.
Yeah.
And second. Yeah. I did.
The idea of, the imposter syndrome, I think everyone experiences to great degrees. But, the fact that you didn't see yourself as a fine artist, I think was an advantage to you, right? Because you didn't necessarily have to sort of qualify yourself and say, oh, this is what I am, so this is what I can do and can't do. You were just doing it just to produce the work, and then you were just curious as to, how people will respond. But I think the fact that it came from such a place, and that you were willing to be so vulnerable in the photographs, is what really probably impressed them in taking a look at the work, as opposed to, most street photography is very detached,
Yes.
And so there's something that allows people to invest themselves into the work in a way that, you really can't find often with street photography, because mostly it's about aesthetics.
100%. I mean, and again, I don't think it's to any of our advantages to pigeonhole ourselves and say, I am a street photographer, or I'm a fine art photographer, or I'm a documentary photographer. I'm a photographer, and, and we all are. And I think it is to all of our advantages to try different things and to experiment and, see what sticks and see what resonates with you. But the truth is, street photography, you're absolutely right. It does. It's tough. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to make street photography resonate in a deep emotional and sort of personal way, as opposed to this body of work. I'm not, quite sure how you do it, or if it can be done, or if it should be done. But I found that it's the deeply personal work that really does speak to people in a broader sense.
Did you find that go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And in a broader group of people than I ever expected, that feel that this body of work touches them in some way, and that they can relate to in ways that I never expected.
Do you find that, immersing yourself in this project, looking at your work in a very different way than you probably did before, has informed what you do when you work on the street?
It's a great question. And I wish I could say yes, but I'm not quite sure that that's true. And again, I think a lot about the psychology behind everything that I do, that we all do, I mean, as artists. And again, I still stand by, you have to be true to yourself. It's hard for me. I'm an introvert by nature. I'm shy. I find it, a little scary to talk to people in the street. I am at arm's length, much more than maybe I should be. I don't know. And yet, when you're working with only yourself or even your immediate family, I found a freedom that I can't, and it's not translatable into this, for me at least.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Caroline, you mentioned that in writing this stuff, it's writing that came easier to you than sort of normal. Mm-hmm. And I know that for me, as both a photographer and a writer, I've had those moments where things just come easily to me. Mm-hmm. And then once I've experienced that, I'm often trying to get back to that space because I see that the work is so appreciably different than when I'm trying to keep my heavy hand on everything.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether you have had a similar experience as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that working on this, it kind of cracked something open in me, or like it reopened something in me. Cause like I've said to my mom before that I feel like this project, it gave me permission to write in a way that I used to write before I had expectations on me as a writer of certain genres, or writing towards a specific audience who have expectations around what your published book that they're paying money for will give them.
Mm-hmm.
And this was more like I could write more impressionistically and write for the beauty of language, and writing, again, really personally in a way that I don't necessarily in my fiction. And I think like getting back in touch with that, with writing for the sake of writing something beautiful, was such a gift. And I do feel like I am taking that with me into my next projects, even though it's like, couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
I'm writing a sports romance now, and it's very different from my mom's book, but I do like that sense of ease. And I think the lack of expectation, and just sitting down to write because you love to write, or sitting down to create the work because you can't not do it.
Yeah.
And really kind of channeling that feeling versus like, well, what are the readers going to think of this? And like, this isn't supposed to be there, and this should sound smarter. This character should be this way. You know, you can't get there unless you get the words down. So yeah, I think that like that sense of ease was a gift to feel again.
That's, that bridge can be such a challenging one to cross.
Yeah.
It's one thing to create work just because you're creating work for yourself, but once you realize that there's an audience for it, right?
Yeah.
That there are people going to be looking at it, going to be reading at it. And at that point, as you start working, you can start second guessing yourself, because you're trying to think about what's going to please them, what they're going to like, what they're not going to like this, not going to like that. Then you're working with an editor who has their own opinion. And it can be really difficult to stick with what works for you. Because I know there have been times when I've compromised how I do things to satisfy somebody else, and it's always left me so dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm moving away from how things I know how I need to work. Right. And then, and so as I've gotten older, I've said no to a lot more than I did earlier, just because I know how it feels afterwards. But, seeing this through to a finished physical manifestation of that must be very satisfying, knowing that it came from that sort of genuine place for the both of you.
I mean, it's, obviously an incredible gift. And, but of course now I think like, I'm thinking about what I want to do next, what we might want to do next. There's always that pressure. I mean, because again, the longer you do it, as you were saying, I mean, that people are looking, people are watching, there's expectations. And I think back to the early days when I first started photography, and it was just pure joy and excitement and learning. And every time something good happened, like somebody wanted to buy a print, or, again, it was like published somewhere. It was like, I mean, this feeling of elation, of pure joy. And I think it's hard for us to sustain that, but I think we have to remember to keep that in the back of our minds, that like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm also a yoga practitioner, and one of my teachers said very simply, we do these poses because they feel good. That's it. Because it makes us feel good, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And I think about that with writing too. I mean, if I gave up writing tomorrow, I don't think anyone would care necessarily, but I would care. My mom would care, but it wouldn't feel good for me. It wouldn't feel good in my body if I stopped writing. So again, kind of letting that be your engine it can be easy to lose sight of, but then when you come back to that, everything aligns.
Yeah. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. In your case, Caroline, it could be a writer if you are inclined to do so. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that be and why? And let's start with you, Danielle.
Oh my gosh, only one?
Good question.
Only one? Okay, well, in that case, I really feel like I can't mention any of my colleagues because I don't want to give preferential treatment to anybody. And then there are so many photographers in the past who have inspired me and whose work I admire. Gosh, if I have to pick one. And again, like I would pick a different photographer for inspiration for my street work as opposed to, my self-portraiture or portraiture. And this might sound like a weird one, but I'm going to go with Robert Frank. His book, The Americans, was life-changing for me. I remember there was an exhibition at the Met quite a few years ago, and I looked at his work and just was sobbing, and the same with his book. And even though my work may not look like his, I think what's important is that his work touched me and continues to touch me and inspires me. And there are, again, many photographers who inspire me. So I think it's important to know your work doesn't have to look exactly like somebody else's for it to be, inspired by. It just has to touch you somehow.
And Caroline?
Yeah. Well, this is like truly a very hard question, but I think for today's purposes, a writer who I would recommend to photographers or artists is Molly Prentice. She's a fiction writer, but she has a very artistic sensibility. And I believe she comes from a family of artists. I know her husband is an artist, and her first book, Tuesday Nights in 1980, is about artists and about art. And the way that she writes is like an impressionistic painting. It's sensory and gorgeous, and like you just kind of want to eat it, and you wish that you could see it, in a painting because it's so gorgeous. And her prose specifically is something that I always look towards when I'm kind of trying to write with that kind of sensory, in that sensory way. Mom, who's the photographer who I love, whose name I always forget, who works with color? Her books are like super colorful.
Say Harvey.
Harvey. I always forget her name, and it's horrible of me, but I fairly recently discovered her work. Obviously, Mom has known her for a long time, but we were able to see some of her earlier books that are now out of print at Martin Schilt's home. And I was so floored by these books. I've never seen photography books quite like this. Yeah. Again, the colors, like my eyes have never seen colors like this. Like the intensity and the vibrancy of them was just, it really floored me. And then she also writes the text, and the way that she wove the text throughout her images was very inspiring for the way that I wanted to present the text in this book. Again, kind of poetic and personal, but like interesting and, not sort of navel gazy. It felt very, the personal is universal. So I would definitely recommend her as well.
Agreed.
Well, Danielle, Caroline, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a real pleasure to have a chance to talk with you.
It was a pleasure. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to Danielle and Caroline for sharing their intimate and layered body of work. You can explore Transcience and more of her photography by visiting DanielleGoldstein.com or follow her on Instagram. And if you're enjoying The Candid Frame, please leave a review on your favorite podcast app. Share the episode on social media, and remember to use the hashtag #TheCandidFrame. You can also support the show financially through Patreon or through a one-time donation through buymeacoffee.com/TheCandidFrame. Your support helps us to continue to bring meaningful conversations with photographers all over the world. And remember to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack, where I provide information not only on the show, but other photographic resources. Our audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.